Good evening and welcome once again to the weekly episode of Commanders Gridiron, where we talk everything on and off the field about Washington Commanders. And I'm your host, Steve Lockman. Thank you for joining in tonight, whether you're watching on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, or Twitch. We got enough to talk about tonight. As we know, there is always something going on with our team here in the DC area. And of course, we're going to start with some off the field stuff before we get to the heartbreaking overtime loss to the Philadelphia Eagles this past weekend. And one of the things of note, we always try to start off the show with something that's off the field news or ongoing sagas, as we call them here at Commanders Gridiron, is the Commanders trademark, right? So recently, the U.S. Patent Trademark Office actually approved the Commanders trademark registration. Now, it doesn't seem like a lot, doesn't seem newsworthy. However, as some of you out there in football land, or especially the Commanders diehards, will know, there's been an individual, I forget his name, who basically, when they went through the rebrandings from Redskins to Washington Football Team and then back to the Washington Commanders on 2/2/22 last year, there's an individual that basically was buying up all the names, all the trademarks, and going through that. So what happens, or what's kind of good to note, is that it's been 20 months since the application was filed by the Washington Commanders for the trademark rights to this team name and marketing and apparel and advertising and everything like that. So it's actually a milestone in that it's only taken less than 2 years for this to be approved. Now, the consideration for this is actually going to be twofold: that it gives them the trademark rights to the name, to apparel, to licensing, to marketing, to everything like that for all their operations on and off the field right now. However, as it's been alluded to in previous episodes and in the DC media, that the new ownership group led by Josh Harris is definitely open to rebranding again. So while this seems like a victory in the short term, it doesn't seem like it's going to be something that's going to be a long-term standing. And the fact that if they in fact do rebrand once again, which in all likelihood, I end up seeing them probably in the 24 to 25 off season doing that. It's something that, I'm not necessarily opposed to. However, I don't see it happening in the 24 off season going into 24. So I think they're going to do Commanders probably this season as well as maybe next season. And then going into 25, they'll end up rebranding into something. But this is a victory for them. And basically, it's the first step of that long, lengthy process. So, basically the U.S. Patent Office had originally actually refused that trademark request based on the grounds that there were similar trademarks that already existed for Washington Commanders, which sounds kind of odd that, it's not like the team name was, the Washington Braves or, the Warriors or something like that, or Red Wolves, that there were a lot of close trademark proximities to that. However, the Commanders lawyers and under the new ownership group as well had successfully argued, basically a refusal to that with no true details about what that argument was. But the U.S. Patent Office said, okay, good enough, we're going to give it to you. So now basically the application goes into a 30-day opposition period where basically anybody can, in writing, oppose the trademark approval for the team. And given the history around the team name and the team itself and, the ongoing saga with the Native American Guild Association and suing them to get the Washington Redskins name back, I would not be surprised if somebody popped up to challenge it by any stretch of the imagination. So, as always, with everything else that goes on off the field with our team, put your seatbelts on, sit down, buckle up. It'll probably be a ride through this as well. As we see what happens in this, just like everything else that goes on with our beloved team, right? Which kind of leads us into the next thing, our beloved team. And this past weekend, and actually, Paul says, as he comments below, how do you feel so many teams use the names such as the Seminoles, the Braves, the Chippewas, etc., and why just the Redskins? So, it's funny that you bring that up. It's something that I thought about on the way home from work the other day. I've kind of become a big fan of Travis Kelce and Jason Kelce in their New Heights podcast, and I'm kind of catching up on episodes because I went back and started from ground zero and kind of catching back up with their podcast. And Travis plays for the Kansas City Chiefs, Native American, moniker and celebrations, all 9 yards. And an argument can be made, hey, why do we have teams such as the Atlanta Braves, Kansas City Chiefs, et cetera, still existing when it was so politically incorrect to have the Washington Redskins? Is it really that big of a deal? Yada yada yada. And to some extent, I can agree with that. However, I take the side of the argument that is it more politically correct and kind of steering to a political side that wanted the name changed because of the name itself and what it meant? So then that kind of opens up the whole can of worms as far as what did the team name mean, right? Was it geared out of respect and loyalty and reverence to the Native Americans, as some people claim, or is it actually a derogatory name for certain individuals? And unfortunately, with the way sponsorships go in this day and age and the amount of money that's attached to them, it just came to the point where, hey, look, I'm okay. I'm okay, but I'm not okay with the Redskins change in that, yes, it was part of the history from the 1940s all the way up until 2020. However, I can definitely see the side that says, hey, look, it was an offensive term to people or towards people that, kind of dictate, hey, look, like that's not acceptable anymore. And just because you can use the argument, hey, that's the way it's always been, doesn't mean that the way that it's always been is necessarily right. So, I honestly think they could have came up with a better rebrand the first time and the second time. And we're going to see what that comes out to, right? And I kind of hope that Josh Harris and company takes that, takes the opportunity to come up with some really awesome rebrand and not just kind of some half-assed, lackadaisical approach and rebrand like Dan Snyder did, a little over a year and a half ago. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. But one thing we do know was that, regardless of the team name, regardless of what they're called, the team came out on Sunday and did what we expected them to do, and that was basically rebound from the shellacking that we took to the Buffalo Bills at home and basically showed up and showed out against the Philadelphia Eagles this past Sunday at Lincoln Financial Field in Philadelphia. And look, let's be honest. Nobody in the country predicted the Washington Commanders to win this game. Nobody expected them to win this game. But they came out early, they came out strong. They showed a bunch of resilience from last week's Buffalo loss. And, they put up a really good fight, taking the Eagles into overtime at 31, ultimately losing 34-31 in overtime. But one of the things that, there were so many good takeaways, and that was kind of the thing that, the team was looking forward, or, the fans and the media were going to be looking at the team and how they responded from the Buffalo loss last weekend, where they gave up 9 sacks and, undubiously made Sam Howell the leader in sacks in the NFL just after 3 weeks. And in all honesty, after watching the Giants game last night against the Seattle Seahawks, I feel pretty confident in the changes that were made to our offense with Eric Bieniemy and, between Ron Rivera, Eric Bieniemy, Sam Howell, and our offense, right? We could have easily came back out from the Buffalo game and basically pulled, New York Giants and looked like Danny Dimes last night getting sacked for 10 times into the turf. And, as Paul says, hey, look, He was hoping for the tie against the Eagles. He really was. We talked about that a couple times, especially in our NFC East war room every night. It's every Thursday night. We talk about that. But it was close. It really was, and it was something that wasn't expected. And I don't think the Philadelphia Eagles were expecting that effort and difference from week to week than what they got from the Washington Commanders. As Ken Fry says, I hope the Commanders do go back to their Chiefs logo. I'm not sure if they will or not. It's definitely something that I think is kind of on the table, off the table. We know they're not going back to the Redskins, but what are they going to use for a logo depending on the name going forward? I think it all depends on the name. My personal preference is going to be the Red Wolves, but we'll see what happens. But as we get back to our Philadelphia game, it looked really good, looked really promising, jumping out of the gate. We take the opening kickoff, go down the field, and we basically get a 1-yard touchdown run out of Curtis Samuel, who has basically been kind of, I don't want to say hiding, but kind of non-evident in the first 3 weeks of the NFL season. And as we talk about it on every episode here at Commanders Gridiron, there's so many playmakers on our team, and there's only one pigskin. So just like a lot of other NFL teams and high-profile offenses, it's hard to get the rock to your playmakers and get them in the hands. And this game was kind of one where Curtis Samuel was featured a little more. I'm not sure if that was by plan or script from Eric Bieniemy and Sam Howell, or if that was just what the Philadelphia Eagles were giving us. But either way, I'll take it. And they jumped out to a 7-0 lead early on in the first quarter, basically 8 minutes into the first quarter. And it was like, oh, wow, holy shit. Like, who are these guys? Not only did they show up to play, but they went and marched down the field on their first drive, and they scored a touchdown, and they're winning by 7. Then you're kind of waiting for the big letdown, right? And Philadelphia does what Philadelphia does, and they turn around and answered with, their phenomenal running back right now, who is, if he's not leading the NFL in rushing, he's pretty damn close to it. DeAndre Swift, as a result of a 5-yard touchdown run for a touchdown, ends up tying the game at 7-7. So then, lo and behold, the question now becomes, how well does Washington answer that score from Philadelphia? And Washington basically did what Washington does so far in, this rebound game, as I call it. And, lo and behold, it was interesting because I think it was Brian Robinson who fumbled the ball, and lo and behold, Terry McLaurin, number 17, was in the right place at the right time, and jumped on the ball in the end zone for a fumble recovery. And basically, now it's 14-7 Washington. Washington later added a field goal in the second quarter, 27-yarder by Joey Slye to make it 17-7. Wow, this looks a little promising, right? That, hey, we might be on to something here. Last year when Philadelphia was 11-0, late in November, I think it was, Washington went up to Lincoln Financial and spoiled the Eagles' perfect season. Could this be a repeat of last season? We still got a whole half of football to play, but so far so good, right, folks? And as time expired in the first half, Jake Elliott does what Jake Elliott does and nailed a 41-yard field goal right up the middle to basically put it to 17-10. Now, a couple of things of notes, and people always throw out stats here, stats there. But a couple of the things that I found interesting was, Jalen Hurts, up until that point, had never won a game when trailing at halftime. And furthermore, the Eagles had never won a game at home in Lincoln Financial when losing at halftime either. It always worries me, when you see those stats in football or especially baseball. It's kind of like jinxing your team, right? Something's not going to happen. But, Washington had some good drives. Washington had some good momentum. So, hey, we're not expected to win this game. Philly's defense is great. Philly's offense is great. We're still trying to figure out who we are, seeing what we're doing, and let's see what the second half brings us. And, Philly starts off, decent drive. Jake Elliott kicks a 36-yard field goal, but then Washington answers that with a long drive and a Brian Robinson 15-yard touchdown run. So now it's all tied up 24-24. And in all honesty, I kind of thought leading up to this game as we looked at last week's episode and then the NFC East War Room last Thursday, that was going to be about the ceiling of where Washington was going to score points this week against that phenomenal Philadelphia defense, right? But oh no, was I wrong? And Philly turns around and AJ Brown, who basically torched us for like 192 yards and 9 catches, I think it was, scores again on a 28-yard touchdown pass from Jalen Hurts. They go up 31-24. And that's kind of where I thought the scoring would be. I figured Philly would be prolific enough to get 30 points, maybe 34, 35, and then Washington would be hovering around that 21-24. And I was going to be happy with that. But as we know, with time expiring and Sam Howell connects with Jahan Dotson with basically 1 second on the clock, and the clock expires to make a 10-yard touchdown pass, and Joey Slye with the extra point, which was vital, as the score is tied 31-31. And let me tell you, so before we talk about overtime, and then we recap the game and the stats and who did well and who did not, let's talk about the 31-31. I'm going to tell you right now, being a diehard Commanders fan, I would play the odds and kick the extra point and take my chances in overtime against the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, there's been enough outcry, criticism, one way or the other, from the DC sports media, DC sports fans, Commanders fans, and, even yesterday on The Herd with Colin Cowherd, they were talking about why Ron Rivera didn't go for 2 in that situation and try to win the game. And Ron Rivera basically came out in his press conference yesterday afternoon. Somebody asked him, why did you not go for 2? And said, hey, look, they had just gone 80 yards down the field to score the game-tying touchdown, and the offense was gassed. And I thought we had and this is Ron Rivera speaking, he goes, I thought we had a better chance of taking the extra point, tying the game, getting a quick breather, going into overtime, and securing a victory against Philly. And in all honesty, I can't argue with that logic, right? However, a lot of people are like, hey, look, this early in the season, you're not expected to beat the Eagles. Go for 2, try to win the game, and see what happens. And, I can definitely see that point as well. And one thing that I'm not 100% on board with, but he does make a great point, was Greg Olsen, former tight end for the Carolina Panthers, who's now a Fox analyst, made the comment yesterday on Colin Cowherd's show that, he would have went for 2 instead of kicking the extra point and tying into overtime, because his logic, and he claims the analytics are there, which I'm not 100% sure I agree with, and I'm not a big analytics guy to begin with, that, you go for the win when you can early in the game versus the longer you stretch out a game going into overtime, especially, the better teams are going to win because it's, you're stretching that game out, i.e. the Philadelphia Eagles, right? So his take was, hey, look, let's go for the 2-point conversion. If we win, we go off for the victory. And if not, then, more than likely the Eagles are going to win in overtime, and we're back to where we were before at 2-2. So either way, it is what it is. And ultimately, the argument can be made that, hey, look, Washington got the ball first, and overtime didn't really do a whole lot with it. Unfortunately, our as I jokingly refer to him, time in and time out, our team MVP, Tress Way, shanked a punt. I think it only went like 30, 35 yards. And I joked in a group text with the Out of the Box sports guys, hey, look, I could kick a ball further than that. But that really hurt us. Put the Eagles in great field position. They made a couple plays, drove down the field a little bit, got into field goal range, and Jake Elliott does what Jake Elliott does, and nailed a 54-yard field goal in overtime to make it 34-31 Philadelphia Eagles. But, as Paul chimes in, and Paul's one of our hosts of them 215 boys here on Out of the Box Sports, so take a Cowboys word for what it's worth. Hal showed his wheels. Putting that on tape for other teams to see was good in my opinion. And you're right. Hal had a great game, and some of the things we were looking to see was how going to respond from the Buffalo game that he got. And, as we know, he got sacked 9 times. Half of those sacks were on him, half of those sacks were on the offensive line. The balance in the play calling wasn't necessarily the greatest. It was a lot more pass heavy than running, which is typically our bread and butter. And, overall, it was just a dismal day in Buffalo. However, we kind of rebounded with that, and Brian Robinson was the leading rusher, 14 carries, 45 yards, and 1 touchdown, even though he did have 1 fumble. Terry McLaurin led the way for our team with 8 receptions for 86 yards. And technically he had a touchdown, even though it was a fumble recovery in the end zone. And, but, we got to give credit where credit is due. And, tonight, as the Monkey Coffee Player of the Week, it's got to be Sam Howell, right? Yes, there were probably some people that did a little bit better than Sam Howell, but, like we just alluded to a couple minutes ago, Howell had a dismal performance, including 4 interceptions last week against the Buffalo Bills, rebounded with 29 out of 41, 290 yards, 1 touchdown, 6 carries, 40 yards. And the biggest stat that isn't even on there because I didn't give it to Paul to put on there is 0 interceptions. So to literally go from, playing one of the AFC elite defenses in the Buffalo Bills to turning around next week, i.e. this past Sunday, and playing an elite NFC team in the Philadelphia Eagles, and to put up almost 300 yards, 1 touchdown, and 0 interceptions is huge. And that's why it makes him this week's Monkey Coffee Player of the Week. Speaking of Monkey Coffee and Player of the Week, Monkey Coffee is releasing their newest brand tonight at midnight, so we're actually a little ahead of the game. Their newest flavor, organic blend, Peru La Florida. So you can jump on Monkey Coffee and use that promo code OOTB Sports for your discount when ordering Monkey Coffee. And they still have the 3 premium blends of bourbon chocolate chip, toasted coconut rum, and Sumatran blend, and their latest flavor, which is going to get released tonight, the organic blend of Peru La Florida. So make sure you jump on the Monkey Coffee to get all of your coffee needs and use that promo code OOTB Sports. All right, as we jump back into the recap a little bit with the Buffalo Bills, or from the Buffalo Bills into the Philadelphia Eagles game, one of the things that, we noticed a lot of, and we talked about it, was how was the resilience, how was the response going to be to the game. And, some of the highlights from the Eagles game, obviously, as we just talked about with our Player of the Week and how, combined between rushing and, the air attack, had 330 yards combined, no turnovers, and 1 touchdown. So he showed a lot of poise, made his presence known in the pocket, scrambled when he needed to, threw the ball away when he had to. But this week, the game plan, and it even was reflected on by Darius Slay of the Philadelphia Eagles in a post-game presser, was, Sam Howell's a special guy, and they got a good quarterback over there in D.C., and, one that we weren't expecting to see get the ball out so fast. So that kind of gives credit to Sam Howell for the week of preparation leading up to the Eagles, as well as, some of the next game note of preparation and play calling by Eric Bieniemy and how he makes the changes from week to week. Let's be honest, folks, if we were still under the Scott Turner offensive coordinator regime, you wouldn't see that happen. And so I think that speaks testaments to Eric Bieniemy and his approach and his experience and his leadership, but more importantly, his accountability to the players from week to week as how they improve and how they, basically get better from week to week. So Bieniemy, even though our game wasn't the greatest against Buffalo, but against the Eagles, we had just over 35 minutes of time of possession against the Eagles, which basically was 74 plays, which resulted in 31 points. So, we're keeping our scoring average up, even though we lost this game. We're producing points, which is one of the big things that we weren't doing in the 2022 campaign. The third person who basically showed up in the game against the Eagles, basically was a gamer, was Terry McLaurin, the 8 for 86, fumble recovery, being in the right place at the right time, gets a touchdown. Curtis Samuel, where was this dude at all season, right? They tried to do some runs with him in the previous 3 games, a couple targets here and there, but, nothing like it was in the Eagles game. Now, like I said, I don't know if that was specifically planned for, or if it was kind of just Sam Howell and Eric Bieniemy taking what the Eagles defense was giving them. And oh, by the way, it resulted in, 7 for 51 by the air, that, basically allowed Curtis Samuel to be Curtis Samuel. And, hey, as Joe, one of the hosts of the Sully Squad, says, hey, great game on Sunday. And I got to give you too. The Eagles and Commanders, going back to the Redskins days, always seem to put forth a great football game, whether it's in Philly, whether it's in DC, middle of the Sunday afternoon, primetime games. It seems like those two teams in their NFC East rivalry always bring the best out of each other and make it a game that's usually, knock on wood, usually a touchdown or less in difference in scoring. And Sunday was no less than that, right? A couple other gamers for actually the last big gamer for Sunday, was probably 3 of the wide receiver tight end combos that we usually don't speak about much. And, it would be Dyami Brown, Logan Thomas, and Pringle, who actually was a wide receiver in Kansas City under Eric Bieniemy up until last year. He was with Chicago, blah, 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 blah. But all 3 of those guys made some big plays. And, it goes back to, only one football, making the plays, getting the rock to people that, basically can make that catch, can make that run, can get some yards after the catch, etc. And, as Dyami Brown and Sam Howell kind of make that reconnection from their UNC days, as well as Logan Thomas finally being healthy, saying, hey, I can play now. Holy shit, where were you for like the last year and a half? And Pringle with a critical 3rd down catch to move the chains when they were deep as like 3rd and 17 or some crazy BS like that. That dude comes out of nowhere and, makes a big play. Even if it was only 1 catch, 2 catch, 3 catches, all at critical moments, for our team as things kind of, look to improve. And, basically how important was it for the Commanders to bounce back from the loss against the Buffalo Bills? It was very important. And Eric Bieniemy told his guys on Wednesday that I really liked the way they came to work on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday leading up to the Philly game. I thought they practiced hard all those days. I thought their focus was on getting ready for Philly, getting the whole Buffalo, hey, look, out of the picture, and getting ready for the Eagles. There's going to be a tough pill to swallow in the shellacking that they took to Buffalo. But I told them in the locker room, once we get back to work, we're moving on. And, hey, look, we're going to practice. We're going to see what happens in the Philly game. And after the Philly game, even though it was a hard loss, basically Eric Bieniemy's approach is, hey, look, we watched the film, we learn from it, we make our adjustments, and we're moving on. We're getting ready for Thursday Night Football. And, some of the things that kind of stood out for, the Commanders from the Eagles game, and it's going to be interesting to see how they make the adjustments on such a short week, was, the offense is getting better. The offense looks like it's meshing a little bit more. The communication is there. Whatever they did, whether it was scripting plays, whether it was Sam Howell at the line of scrimmage, or whether it was EB in the week of practice leading up to and a combination thereof, the offensive line looked tremendously better than what they did against Philadelphia. Now, a lot of that had to, be credited to Sam Howell, quick drops, quick pass releases, that 3 to 4 second pass release, reading one guy, reading the other, making quick throws, which certainly helped, the offensive line. But one of the things that, obviously with every 1 or 2 good things in a game, there's usually 1 or 2 bad. And unfortunately, this week was not Emmanuel Forbes' week. As we know, Emmanuel Forbes is the 1st round draft pick number 16 out of Mississippi State this year. Kid has a lot of promise. Kid is going to be a really good cornerback in the league, has really good technique, has really good skill. The problem that he has right now on this big rookie learning curve, as we know, going from college to football, is he's not quite consistent, truly consistent from week to week. And unfortunately, there were, I don't know, like 80% of the time, for whatever reason, he was matched up with A.J. Brown, who's basically one of the best wide receivers in the NFL. And, I give credit for the Eagles for, doing what you got to do, because let's be honest, if the Commanders were going up against a rookie DB in the secondary, we'd probably do the same thing that the Eagles did. And what did that do? That resulted in A.J. Brown having 9 receptions for 175 yards and 2 touchdowns. And I think 4 of those catches of his 175 yards were over 50 yards. So, and unfortunately, I think 3 out of 4 of those long catches and like 7 out of 9 of these overall receptions came against Emmanuel Forbes. So, the kid played in a lot of coverages as well. Everybody messes up in the NFL, everyone. The key is going to be what happens next and how he responds as we go into a short week against the Chicago Bears on Thursday night. But, some inconsistencies definitely killed him in the Philadelphia game, which led to the killer plays. But it's okay. It happens. So, what's going to be next for him? And that's going to be interesting. And, as we take a look going into Thursday night's game, we now play the Chicago Bears. Or I should say the winless Bears, right? And as Paul says, hey, look, that's smart ball. The Cowboys did that as soon as the Patriots quarterback went out and the rookie came in. CD 3 straight passes and one of them a touchdown. And you're absolutely right. I was watching that game to see how Dallas was going to end up playing the defensive guru in Bill Belichick, right? Because let's be honest, you kind of watch the other NFC East teams because we play the same schedule as each other, right? So at some point in time this year, I forget when, I don't have it in front of me, Washington's got to play the New England Patriots. And, so you kind of watch, what Philly does against other teams and against the AFC East and what Dallas does against the AFC East and et cetera, et cetera. So I was kind of, watching that game, taking it all kind of as a grain of salt that, hey, look, the Cowboys are better than the Commanders. Cowboys have a little bit better defense than the Commanders. And, let's see what happens. But you're absolutely right, that if you're thrown in that position of somebody going out and a rookie playing or a rookie starting, that, you're going to exploit that, whether it's a rookie linebacker, rookie secondary, whatever. You're going to try and take advantage of it. But, so that kind of leads us to the next discussion of, even though he's not really a rookie anymore, he's still a super young quarterback in Justin Fields playing for the Chicago Bears. Or as I just alluded to a couple minutes ago, the winless Chicago Bears. And, what kind of really scares me about this game is A, it's a short week. B, it's a Thursday night game. We don't do very well in short weeks, and B, primetime games. So, it's super interesting that, as we don't really look ahead in the schedule, but as Paul says, hey, look, we got the Bears, the Falcons, the Giants, and the Eagles, and the Patriots. So realistically, before I super jump ahead, there's a lot of winnable games for Washington coming up. But, we got to take them one at a time, because as I was talking to Paul before the show, one of the things that worries about me as we do winless teams or like teams that only have one victory, that we play down a lot to our opposition. And, Paul shared the same sentiment that, he feels that his Cowboys do the same way too. And, maybe it's a thing across the league that guys look at the teams on paper and be like, man, this is a easy win. This won't be a hard game, whatever. And it kind of affects them mentally. And for whatever reason, it affects our team a whole hell of a lot. And we played down to teams. I mean, basically just look at our first 2 weeks, right? And the Arizona Cardinals and the Denver Broncos. We should have handily beat both of those games. And even though we ended up with wins in both of those games, they shouldn't have been as hard as what they were. But we make them that hard, right? And I honestly thought that the Bears might actually get a victory this past Sunday against the Denver Broncos. However, the Denver Broncos were 0-3 and the Bears were 0-3. So somebody had to go at 0-4. And I honestly didn't think in the back of my mind that Sean Payton and Russell Wilson were going to go 0-4. And, they did what they had to do. And, oh my God, look at this. There's a high scoring game that the Denver Broncos won 31-28. But, one of the things that makes that interesting was Justin Fields looked like a good Justin Fields when he was good last season. The kid went 28 for 35 of 335 yards, 4 touchdowns and 1 interception. And, that's a pretty solid game, right? Let's give the kid some credit. The problem is, his leading receiver had 18 carries, 103 yards, and Khalil Herbert his running back, Khalil Herbert had 18 carries for 103 yards. And DJ Moore, who came over from Carolina in the offseason, was his leading receiver with 8 receptions and 131 yards and 1 touchdown. So he did find him. But let's be honest, there is so much crap going around the Bears so far this year that it's not funny. It's almost like being the Commanders 2.0, right? And let's be honest, that if somebody tells you it doesn't affect them on the field, regardless of whether it's on the field or off the field, it affects you as an organization, right? So, all the coaching changes that they've had, it's kind of like the quarterback carousel, and actually they've probably had a similar quarterback carousel to the Washington Commanders over the last 10 years. But let's be honest, and all the coaches that they've had since like 2010 or something like that. Lovie Smith, yes, the Lovie Smith, was the last coach of the Chicago Bears to have a winning record. And he got fired having a winning record, like in the middle of the season. So, they haven't really found a coach. They haven't really found a quarterback. Kind of sound familiar, right, to DC fans? So then, we start the season as the Bears, 0-3, and we're not really looking like Justin Fields is comfortable. It's not really looking like we're calling an offense that fits Justin Fields' skill set. And, last year, yes, he ran a lot. Yes, he got hit a lot. Yes, he took some injuries. And I think some of the mindset was, hey, look, we don't want to expose him as much to, subject him to injury. So their offense necessarily wasn't gearing towards his skill set and kind of was steering away from what Justin Fields does well. And, this game against the Broncos this past Sunday, they kind of found that and went back to what Justin Fields does good. Now, as I said, there's always 10,000 distractions with the Chicago Bears. So let's be honest. You got a shitty season. You're 0-4. Your quarterback doesn't really have an identity yet because your offensive coordinator doesn't know what your quarterback is good at. Then you have a head coach who's been there for 2 years, who has basically, obviously, a sub 500 record. And rumors are already talking in week 4 that there's going to be, if they lose Thursday night against the Washington Commanders in DC, that they're going to be cleaning house between the head coach, the offensive coordinator. They already lost their defensive coordinator, who we're going to talk about in a second. But, basically they're talking already a third into the season, and we're going to clean house of the coaching staff. Good, bad, different, who knows? One of the things that they've already been rumored to do is that they're going to get rid of Justin Fields already, and look for another quarterback in the draft next season. And, basically kind of do an Arizona Cardinals, 2.0 2024 edition, right? And, we all know that the scandal off the field with the defensive coordinator who, resigned for personal and medical reasons, only to come to find out 48 hours later, oh, by the way, had his home and office raided by the FBI. So, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with this team, who this team is, what team is going to show up on Thursday night. And, oh, by the way, they sent home, I think probably, if not wide receiver number 1, but not wide receiver number 2, Chase Claypool, who was a stud for the Steelers for how many years. And that whole story is just like surprising and absurd in itself, right? That, there haven't been any details as to why he hasn't been playing, why he wasn't at practice, other than the fact that, basically they told him not to dress, not to show up. You're not making the trip for the game on Sunday. And, basically, I guess Chase Claypool is now on the trade block. And it's interesting that Paul, brings up about Claypool and Fields. If they lose on Thursday, like, who else is going to be gone, right? they might be packing everybody, and shit, they might be calling Little Giants and the Bad News Bears to come play for them in Chicago. Who knows? And it leads us up to Thursday night's game that, as it's a primetime game in FedEx, we do better in primetime at home than away, even though our primetime record isn't the greatest or where it needs to be. But I think coming off of the Philadelphia game in which we lost in overtime, there were so many good things that came out of Philadelphia. Even, taking into account the Emmanuel Forbes production and, Tressway, the one bad punt, yada, yada, yada. The good things outweighed the bad that we can build off of and continue to grow on a short week for the Chicago Bears. So, one of the things that, even though short weeks are, walkthroughs and maybe some film review, but not a whole lot of time to do some full-fledged, practicing, it still begs, to wonder, what output, what production are we going to put together on the field on Thursday night? And, when you watch the Eagles game, on Sunday between Bieniemy and Howe, Bieniemy crushed it, right? That he had a lot better play calling in Philly than he did in Buffalo. And I see that continuing Thursday night, 2 nights from now, that, he has another good play calling night against the Chicago Bears. The Chicago Bears, let's be honest, aren't necessarily the greatest on defense. So it should allow Sam Howell to be Sam Howell again. I'm only hoping that, being a lesser team, and the Bears, that Sam Howell doesn't revert, back to week 1, week 2 play style, or the offensive line for that matter. And, putting up marginal numbers, a lot of sacks, hurries, rushes, holding on to the ball, trying to force things, and kind of, being that rookie quarterback. But as we saw in the Eagles game, the ball was out quick. The passing game was designed to help and protect Howell. McLaurin got going early. There was balance. There was huge adjustments, especially at halftime. And I think all those things are going to need to basically just, hey, look, different week, different team, same thing, right? What we did on Sunday, we're now doing on Thursday, maybe a little bit more into it, a little bit more developed. But, if we can repeat that production, even after a tough loss against Philadelphia, we're going to be fine. And, one of the things that gets harped on, down here in the DC area, not only is our primetime record, there you go, it's 10-14 on Thursday Night Football. And let's be honest, I hate Thursday Night Football. I hate playing on Thursday Night Football only because of the short week. Some of the players actually like it because, they're not practicing as hard and they actually don't get hurt or injured as much on the Thursday night game, which kind of seemed odd to me, but it kind of is what it is, right? And one of those things that's going to be super important for us on Thursday night is what the defense is going to do. And there's people, it's so absurd already. They're like, we need to fire Jack Del Rio. Like, why is this dude in charge of our defense? And as we allude to it on almost every episode here, Commanders Gridiron, that our defense starts out slow. And by week 8, week 9, somehow we miraculously figure out that we can play defense, and holy shit, we turn into a top 10 defense in the NFL by the end of the season. In the second half of the season, we're playing absolute lights out football. Well, this year, we've actually started out pretty decent, so to speak. Nothing spectacular. Chase Young was out a game and a half, and, some other injuries here and there between Jonathan Allen and Daron Payne. But, if you look at Jack Del Rio's past in not only in the NFL, but especially here in DC with the Commanders, in 2020, when he started with the team, in the first 4 games, we were giving up 28 points a game. And, basically after week 5, through 16, it dropped down to 18 points a game. And, like I said, holy shit, here comes the defense. They figured out how to play. They figured out that they needed to show up, and, they became a prolific defense in the last 2/3 of the season in 2020. And that's actually reflected in 2021. The first 4 games, they gave up 30.5 points. So basically 31 points a game. Look at what we did with the Eagles. We gave up 31, 34, counting overtime, points a game. And then week 5 through 17 in 2021, it dropped to 24 points a game. Once again, putting them in the top 10 for the NFL. 2022, when they became the Washington Commanders, kind of the same thing. They started out in the first 4 weeks at 26.8 points per game, and then the rest of the season, 18.2. They figured out how to play defense. I don't know what it is with these guys that are, paid millions and millions of dollars every year to play football, why it takes them 5 weeks to figure out what they're doing and, what they're on the field for. But I'm glad they figure it out after week 5. And hopefully week 5 against the Bears is no different than the last 4 years, because in 2023, so far, in weeks 1 through 4, they've given up 30 points a game. So what does that mean? That gives me promise and hope that basically the Bears aren't going to score more than 17 points a game Thursday night. And in all honesty, if we can keep the Bears less than 17 points a game on Thursday, which I think we can do, and we keep our average of 30 to 31 points a game, that kind of spells victory for us on Thursday night, right? And as Paul says, teams that have won a game are dangerous. Wounded animals are the most dangerous, playing for nothing, right? Gimmick plays are open at any time. You don't know what they're going to do and everything, right? And you're absolutely right. Let's be honest. We suck at playing winless teams. I was joking with Paul before the show that I think it was like in 2019, 2020, when the Lions were like horrendously terrible, and they had their 0-16 or 1-16 season. Their only victory was against Washington that year. And like the year after that, there was a team that was, I think, winless too, like 0-4 or 0-5 or something. Might have been the Colts or somebody in the South. They got their only victory against us, or their first victory of 2 that year against DC. So the teams that are annually terrible, and let's be honest, the Bears are that we don't do very well against. And I could honestly see this being a trap game, but I truly believe in my heart that it's not going to be. That, look, we're going to rebound after the Philly loss, the gut-wrenching Philly loss, and the Buffalo loss, and we're going to start tacking on some victories here. As it was alluded to earlier, we have the opportunity to be, put a little win streak together. We have the Bears, we have the Falcons, we have the Patriots, we have the Giants, who, let's be honest, the Giants kind of were the Commanders last year, and they don't really know who they are and what their identity is yet. But the Giants always play us tough. I mean, shit, we tied them last year, a freaking tie, right? So it's kind of NFC East teams are always harder than everybody else, regardless of who the schedule is. So, out of the next 5 games, we essentially could be 7-2 by the time we roll through this little streak. Now, granted, our schedule doesn't get any easier after that, but there's a decent amount of momentum that we could be, 6-2, 7-2 by then. And Paul asked a great question. Do you think the enemy is working these boys extra hard on the short week? He's built it that way. Kind of yes and no. So I know they've been doing full practices this week, and I'm not sure how full practices are. But one of the things that I think has kind of led to where we are this season, and it's strictly because of Eric Bieniemy, and Paul and I have talked about it on the show, and as well as kind of off air, was the approach that Bieniemy brought in the offseason, especially during training camp, and how he practices his offense for the upcoming season. And I think that we're seeing that paying off already. That not only are we putting more points on the board, but we're making the adjustments we need to. We're scheming differently to accommodate what's working or what's not working. They were kind of gassed at the end of the game, right before overtime, after that long drive to tie the game on the Dotson touchdown. But, we're seeing the work that pay off that they were putting in during training camp, the long practices, to the 2-hour minute or 2.5 hour minute per the bargaining agreement, right? That, what was happening in the off season, and I think their practices are basically just a continuation of what they were doing in training camp. And, which kind of leads us to one of the final things as we kind of wind up with a couple more things here to go. But, looking at the injury report for Thursday night, yes, we're only 2 days away. We still have another one to come out tomorrow, and even, the game time decisions. But so far, the injury report's kind of short. And, it's something we like to see, especially in week 5 of the NFL season. You don't want your injury report to be long at any time in the season, especially this time, when you're only a quarter to a third into the NFL season. But, cornerback Christian Holmes didn't practice today with a back injury. Curtis Samuel, and I didn't know this, actually got hurt in the game against the Eagles with a quad injury. He didn't practice yesterday or today. So it'll be interesting to see if he goes on Thursday night. As we know, with the Curtis Samuel saga from last year and the year before, he kind of is injury prone. So I would not be surprised if Curtis Samuel is not active Thursday night, takes the long week to get ready for the Atlanta Falcons, and then is ready to go the following Sunday against Atlanta against the Falcons. That would not surprise me at all. Wouldn't surprise me if he's on the field Thursday night, but it also wouldn't surprise me if they hold him out and kind of give him that extra long week to recover for the Falcons. One of the surprises that did kind of surprise me was Jahan Dotson was on the injury report today for an ankle injury. He was limited, so at least he practiced. Knowing Jahan Dotson and what he brings to the field in his game performance, as well as meeting him a couple times off the field, I think he's going to end up playing Thursday night against the Bears, especially at home, primetime game. We'll see what happens on the injury report tomorrow with him. Chris Rodriguez, running back, is still sick. He was sick last Sunday, didn't play against the Eagles. So I'm not sure what's going on there with him, but hopefully he gets healthier soon. We need that third back just to help mix things up between B-Rob, AG, and Rodriguez. Martin, cornerback, was actually full practice today, and as well as St. Juice, who had a neck stinger last Sunday's game, was actually a full participant in practice today too, even though he's been on the injury report for the last 2 days. So technically only having like 4 guys on the injury report is pretty good, especially with a couple of them that are more than likely going to come back for Thursday night. So we'll definitely see what happens. So speaking of Thursday night's game, I think where I see this going is, as much as I want to drop my money and say, hey, look, this is what's going to happen, I don't see the Commanders choking the chicken and spoiling this game against the Bears. Unfortunately, the Bears are going to go 0-5, and the Bears just don't know who the Bears are. And, as Paul says, the Bears Claypool starters, Eddie Jackson, Jaylon Johnson, haven't practiced. Alfredo, yeah, I knew he was on. Have Josh Blackwell on injury reserve for 2 weeks, secondary depleted. Right. So, man, you hate to say this, but like that almost plays perfectly into Eric Bieniemy and Sam Howell. Let's get the ball to, Logan Thomas. Terry McLaurin's probably going to have a big game at home. Jahan Dotson will be out there too. Turner will probably have another great game at tight end as well. He's helping us out, a lot on the offense too. And, B-Rob and AG, as long as AG doesn't fumble. But, B-Rob will probably have another big game, setting up that play action passing. And, I see the Commanders basically pulling out what I think is going to be like a 34-14 win. And actually I'll probably change that. Let's call it 34-10. The Bears are probably going to get a touchdown. Justin Fields will probably do Justin Fields' thing, and he's probably going to get the touchdown at least once. But the Bears are probably going to end up kicking a field goal. So it'll probably be like a 34-14, 34-10 victory Thursday night for the Commanders. And, I just see that, they're – you hate to say it, but on paper, the Commanders in all 3 facets of the game, offensively, defensively, and special teams, are just going to be better than the Bears. I don't think the Bears are going to be able to handle, the defense of the Commanders. And as Katie Spencer says, there's too many players got injured for the Bears. And you're absolutely right that, when you basically are going from your A players to your B team or your JV team, you just can't compete against the players, the first line of the other team, and when the Bears have to go against that front seven in the front, specifically the front four of Sweat, Payne, Allen, and Young, it's gonna be a rough game for Justin Fields. As Paul says, he predicts the Commanders are going to be 33, Bears 13. He hates saying that, but um, that's who he's got in the Commanders as well. The only thing that scares me is Justin Fields, right? Which Justin Fields are we going to get? As we've talked about it on numerous episodes here, the Commanders Gridiron. Commanders don't do very well with mobile quarterbacks. Justin Fields definitely fits that category under mobile quarterback. Justin Fields isn't afraid to tuck it and run. And, we saw what Jalen Hurts did against us last week. We saw what Josh Allen did against us the week before, as well as Russell Wilson the week before that. And, so you kind of get the point, right? Hopefully we can start out fast. Hopefully we can, finish our drives, limit our turnovers like we did against the Eagles. And, if we can do those things, I see us pulling out the dub on Thursday night. And, we'll see what happens Thursday night. And before we go for the night, we got a couple other sponsors to hit for our show. Starting off with Jason Fine, Attorney Big Al at 1-800-HURT-123. That's Attorney Big Al, who specializes in motor vehicle accidents, slip and falls, workman comp, personal injury claims, has 3 convenient locations throughout the Mid-Atlantic in Philadelphia, PA, Cherry Hill, New Jersey, and Philadelphia, PA. And that's Jason Fine, a.k.a. Attorney Big Al. Contact him for all of your legal needs at 1-800-HURT-123. Last but not least, we have the Dugout Mugs. As we know, postseason MLB started today with the Wild Card Series. So log on to Dugout Mugs for 20% off. Use promo code OOTBSports20. Grab that Dugout Mug. And if you don't know what Dugout Mugs are, basically hollowed out baseball bats with your favorite MLB team on it, or you can get them personally customized. And they also make Dugout shot glasses. So depending on your preference of beverage, you can order those at dugoutmugs.com. Remember to use OOTBSports20 for your 20% off when you order them online. And before we go, just a couple quick notes. As we said, we're going to be predicting the Commanders to come out on top in the realm of 34 to 14, 10, somewhere around that lane. Next week, we're not going to be on the air. I actually have the chance, I guess, to we're going to be attending a meet and greet with Coach Ron Rivera in one of his public media deals out in Northern Virginia. So we won't have a show next week. So we will be on the following Tuesday, October 17th. We'll do a quick recap of the Bears game, and we'll also be recapping the Atlanta Falcons game. And if I do have time in the next week, we might be able to put out a little preview for the Atlanta Falcons game. But if not, we'll definitely have a lot to cover in the next episode of Commanders Gridiron. And as always, thank you for tuning in. Catch us, like us, subscribe us. You can find us on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and Twitch. And as always, this is Commanders Gridiron. I'm your host, Steve Lockman, signing off for tonight. Thank you.